Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final edition of NGA's Energy Innovation Webinar Series. Thank you all for being here. As always, I am so thrilled to see so many folks join and interested in this series and in this important topic. On behalf of all of NGA, we're delighted to have you join us. As you all know, NGA members are at the forefront of our energy future. They are committed to supporting and achieving the ambitious climate and environmental goals that have been set up across our region. From researching and investing in emerging energy fuels and technologies to adopting new strategies to support efficiency and emissions reductions, NGA members are leaders both regionally and nationally. This series reflects NGA's dedication to supporting our members as they embrace innovative solutions that not only address today's energy challenges, but also pave the way for a resilient, sustainable future. I would be remiss if I did not plug that this series is a prelude to our inaugural Energy Innovation Summit, taking place September 25th and 26th in Springfield, Massachusetts. We're developing a really exciting agenda. We've already announced one panel and one keynote speaker, and we will have more of those things coming in the next couple of days and weeks. So keep an eye on NGA's website and social media for that information. And if you have questions, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. And we'd love to get you involved if you'd like to be involved. Now, as we begin, if you have questions, please use the chat function, and we will do our best to make sure we can address those as much as possible towards the end. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce a really exciting leader in the renewable natural gas space, Heather Dziedzic from the American Biogas Council. Today, Heather is going to give us not necessarily an RNG 101, but maybe an RNG 102. So we're excited to have this conversation. Heather, thank you. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you. And thanks to everybody that jumped on. We're going to keep this relatively informal. My personal preference is to not give you death by PowerPoint and to make this more conversational. So NGA and many on this call have pinged me and had some insights onto what a 102 type discussion for RNG might look like and sound like. So I'm going to start with a little bit of overview, but please don't be shy. If you guys have burning questions, reasons why you joined this discussion today, things you wanted to learn, even basic questions, drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A. I'm happy to steer that way. I want to make sure that this is as high value for you guys as it can be. So please don't be shy with your questions, curiosities, etc. And if I can't answer it, certainly we're a small enough group here. We can do follow-ups through Christian and others. So with that, really quick introduction to myself and the ABC, in case you guys are not familiar. The American Biogas Council is an industry trade association, so we represent utilities, yes, but also RNG producers, end users, financiers, investment community, oil majors, et cetera. So we represent the whole value chain. It makes my job really interesting because we have such diverse membership, but it's really a common ground is the production facility, right? Recycling waste materials into energy. And so as an organization, we're agnostic to what goes into biogas systems. So we represent anything that is waste that can be turned into energy. So that means wastewater systems, farm systems, landfill systems, food waste diversion, all of those. Agnostic to what goes in, dedicated crops, et cetera. And then we're agnostic to where it goes. So as we'll talk about a little bit today, there's a ton of diversification in the demand for RNG. This is no longer just put it in the pipe and burn it at a boiler. This landscape, the market is much more complex, much more diverse. And that means that the end uses that we advocate for are also diverse, and we don't pick or choose winners or losers. So things like electricity, RNG certainly as a direct end use, but also advanced fuels, advanced technologies, syngas, electricity, fuel cells. We get a lot of interest in maritime and other liquid fuels where RNG can go. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So tons of diverse policies and markets on both sides of that. We're also advocating for what we call co-products. So helping build that revenue stack through other things that biogas systems produce. So whether that's commercial CO2, fertilizers, et cetera. So we're doing all of that. So that's ABC in a very small nutshell. Personally, I joined ABC about 2.5 years ago to run their government affairs and policy team. So I lead all the things that we're doing at local, state, federal, and now international levels, obviously with the team to make sure that we're putting policies and regulations in place that help grow the market. which we'll also talk about today. I have a short stint in the utility industry, about 8-9 years, where I spent doing essentially environmental sustainability, both on the compliance side, but then eventually in gas asset and financial planning, sort of gas decarbonization, which is what landed me in the RNG space. So that's me in a really short version. So we'll get into a little bit more about where the RNG market is today. I will say I am not an engineer. I don't pretend to be an engineer. But in my prior work, I did do a lot of business development. And so we can talk a little bit about that. But if you guys have burning questions about the gas quality side of things, engineering, interconnects, I have my friend Dawn on the call who I might toss the baton to on that. So you'll see a little bit of bias on the sort of development and how we get this across the finish line, but also a bias toward policy and government affairs, which is what I live and breathe every day now. So we'll cover it all. All right, so in the market today, what we've seen is continued steadied investment in RNG. Last year alone, there was just over $3 billion invested in new RNG systems. And that really equated to about 125 new biogas capture systems. Of those 125 systems that were built in 2024, 95% of those were RNG. So 119 new RNG facilities just in the US. We often get asked about the potential for RNG, and it seems like a drop in the bucket, especially for many of you who are managing considerable volumes through your systems as utilities. But this was never, as an industry, this was never a numbers game, right? This was never a displace every molecule kind of game. We never sought to displace volumetrically, a significant portion of the gas in the North American pipelines. This has been a sustainability play, as many of you know, and that sustainability value and the conversations that happen around RNG vacillate widely based on politics, as many of you know, or based on market demand. And so we'll talk a little bit about where those demand centers are today here in a minute. But we're constantly riding as an industry this wave of interest in RNG, and where that interest is coming from will vary depending on the state that you're in and the government policies that are in place, whether that's compliance or, aspirational. It will depend on the large industrial players that are in your states and what their global supply chains are demanding of them. It will depend on individual, households and what their politics and preferences are. And so because of that, we see the pendulum swinging rather wildly in terms of sentiment around RNG, but that hasn't really impacted the trajectory. So we see a very linear trajectory of growth in RNG and in biogas systems in general. And that has just been a testament to its staying power and the fact that anybody on either side of the aisle or in any state under any policies can find a spot for biogas and RNG. In the Northeast, especially in the past few years, we've heard a lot of conversations about electrification. Do we or don't we need the gas system? Do we or don't we continue to invest in this sort of infrastructure? And the reality is, especially from our side, is that we can walk into elected official offices that have goals and aspirations for electrification, and we can say, look, we're not telling you not to do, electric pathways. We're telling you that that's not a decision that's binary, that you can invest in biogas and RNG today, and that biogas and RNG is available to you down the road for electricity or for hydrogen or for any number of other things that you might want to do as a policymaker or as a society. Investing in RNG today does not mean that you've foregone those other opportunities down the road. And that flexibility is something that has resonated a lot in the utility commissions, which we circulate through quite frequently. because there's this concern about stranded assets, right? If we invest in RNG, what does that mean 10 years down the road? If we invest in interconnections or pipeline system expansion, what does that mean? Are those stranded assets? And I think we can clearly say that that is not the case, that if you invest in an interconnection, especially to bring an RNG facility on, that is not stranded. Not only is it serving purposes on the day that it goes into use, but it can pivot based on policy, based on market, based on pricing into any number of other things, right? You've essentially created a pipeline quality molecule that can then be used in fuel cells if that's the way that it goes. It can be converted to hydrogen if that market takes off, right? You've created that agility so that you don't strand an asset, so that you continue to maximize the value of that asset and the value of that energy for your utility customers. So these are the conversations we're having around maintaining value for RNG as we, march forward into the unknown or into tumultuous times that seemingly can put pressure on things like RNG as a sustainable alternative or as a carbon strategy, as a risk mitigant, any number of things. Really, we're trying to remind folks that this is not a one-trick pony, right? So I mentioned that we had 119 new RNG systems. Of those 119 in 2024, they produced roughly 180 BCF of RNG on the pipeline. And so again, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's also not immaterial. So depending on the region, depending on pipeline constraints and access to natural gas, those could be significant and material volumes to a utility or to a particular customer who is in need of molecules. Overall, the RNG landscape is still bent a little bit toward electricity. So about 60% of the biogas captured in the US still goes to produce electricity. And all of the biogas captured in the US last year was just over 700 BCF. And we have the opportunity to about 10x that. And so you look at the opportunity for TCF volumes, right? We get really excited about the potential to grow. But where that goes, I think, is the ultimate question these days. So as I mentioned, we've got 700 BCF flowing right now in the US, and 60% of that is electric. Last year, 95% of those investments were RNG. And so we've seen this pendulum shift from electric over the past, I would say, decade, heavily into RNG in the last couple of years. And what I'll talk about a little bit here today is the fact that that pendulum is swinging back. But this isn't a binary swing between electric and RNG. As that pendulum is swinging back, we are seeing a massive diversification in where RNG is going. That includes markets and markets outside of the United States. And I know for those that are in the utility space, you're like, yeah, I don't care about Europe. Those are not my customers, right? But I will say that I would encourage you guys to think creatively about who your customers are and what potential they might have to participate in the markets that I'll describe. There's a lot of diversification in where this goes, right? So the conversation around RNG for many years has been, I need to get it into customer homes for space heating. Great. But that requires a specific customer and specific regulatory programs to allow utilities to really produce results there, right? And to get customers to adopt premium pricing for RNG. So there are hurdles there in customer behavior and regulatory constraints, et cetera. So then the next goal, right, was, all right, let's go industry. Let's find industries that are in our customer base that need low carbon solutions, the high heat, the manufacturing, you name it, right? Depending on your state, you know who those people are. But there has been barriers there with respect to how those customers can claim those benefits. So we continue, especially as ABC, to beat our head up against a wall against global constraints around carbon accounting that mostly originate in Europe. and I'll touch on that very briefly. But there are hurdles to directly selling into industrial and commercial markets because those customers, while they might love RNG as a premium product, they cannot clearly communicate that premium to the market or to the rest of their supply chain. Very briefly on that constraint. Carbon accounting, as it relates to the thing I just described, that market barrier, is your inventory accounting, right? Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3, how your emissions from your operations and those of your customers are conveyed to the broader market. That inventory accounting has originated in Europe. It has long been dictated by European policies and stakeholders in Europe. The infrastructure systems in other countries are not nearly as robust as the utility and pipeline systems here in the US. And there is a bias against our type of systems and our robust pipeline grid because they simply don't have that. The idea that you could span, a system and put RNG in Massachusetts and deliver it to California is a foreign concept. And the connectivity of our system is astounding. But it also means that we have work to do to be able to communicate that sort of book and claim capability that doesn't always exist or rarely exists in other countries. So that is a huge hurdle that we're working through as an industry. Now that's relevant for this group because I'm going to talk a little bit about policies that are on the horizon, markets that are on the horizon and growing that may or may not impact where this industry goes. And so we just got done with a bunch of policy work in DC regarding tax incentives. Those are obviously top of mind for utilities that are investing in RNG, whether you're doing it through supply agreements or you're looking to go out and invest in assets. Those tax credits are huge, reducing the LCOE of your projects. They're reducing the ultimate cost to your customers. So that was a huge win. And there are production tax credits in place for RNG through the 45Z tax credit. There are also potential credits available in hydrogen production through 45V, which we have to tweak a little bit to really get clarity there, but they're there. And then we also have biogas or RNG to electricity that qualifies for credits. So a lot of great domestic policy, just financial support under these projects to get built. And those are going to stick around anywhere between 2028, 2029, and for electricity out even further. Other policies, like I mentioned at the top of the call, that the industry is working on are really seeking to diversify the revenue stack, right? We cannot, as a society and as customers, energy consumers, bear the brunt of developing out that 10x of RNG, right? We cannot put all of those cost premiums onto utility customers. I know that this group is very familiar with the concept of affordability and how heavily it plays into decisions with regulatory approvals and commissions. And the reality is that bearing all of that cost of RNG premiums in a utility customer bill is prohibitive in many cases, especially for very low carbon alternatives. So what we're talking about today with policymakers, including those in New York and Pennsylvania, are how do we create policies that complement the energy policies? How do we lean into things like recycling policies? How do we manage, waste fees, tipping fees, recycling incentives, things that on the waste side, the feedstock side of these systems, we are creating revenue opportunities for producers that, again, help lower the total cost of that RNG. The other way that we're looking at that at the federal level and in some cases at the state level are those other co-products, fertilizer, commercial CO2, when those are domestically produced or they're lower carbon, right? They have opportunities to create premiums, and there are incentives available, especially on the fertilizer side, to, again, bring in revenue to the project, lower total cost. We are looking at all of those in an effort to say, here are ways to reduce the cost, maybe not entirely, but the cost borne by the user, the energy user. Right now, the industry has been built by the energy sector subsidizing the full premium of RNG. And we're trying to move away from that and start to have those conversations in a way that helps, utilities bring in revenue from other places, but also have a conversation about affordability that makes sense. Outside of things that ABC is working on to get these things across the finish line, the pendulum that I mentioned is not binary and it's diversifying. Those other markets that are starting to mature look like liquid fuels, look like secondary fuels, where RNG is being used as a process input or as a feedstock into other fuels. So think about sustainable aviation fuel, SAF. Think about methanol, ethanol, biodiesel, renewable diesel, and out for exports as LNG or bio-LNG. All of those fuels are leveraging RNG for the same reasons that utilities initially looked at it, which was sustainability, low carbon. So when I said at the top of the call, think creatively about RNG, who in your customer base is part of that value chain, right? Do you have refineries? Do you have port authorities? Do you have people in your rural communities who are involved in biofuel production? These are maybe non-traditional customers that might be interested in RNG, right? So these are the policies that we're leaning into as well. Markets from those obviously exist for liquid fuels, right? That's a huge market globally, nationally. The more RNG that can go into things like biodiesel, renewable diesel, that market exists. And it's just a matter of creating clear pathways and qualifications for RNG in those existing programs, which we do through EPA and the Renewable Fuel Standard. The other sector is maritime. Ton of interest in maritime. We have a lot of international conversations starting about sustainable maritime fuels. That demand, again, is huge. And being able to move RNG via LNG into that market or via methanol into that market is a huge potential. Again, I understand a Maersk is not often a utility customer, but your refiners and your port systems may be customers, and those are things to watch. There are also regulatory programs that might allow you to sell some of that RNG or at least the attributes to those that might not be on your pipeline, right? So again, thinking outside the box and how RNG assets could play in these markets for utilities. The other thing, I know you guys are gas utilities, but I'm going to talk about it anyway because the electric conversation is huge right now. I'm sure you've heard about it in the media. It's, not news to anybody. But AI, data centers, onshoring manufacturing, all of these demands on our electric system are creating a revived interest in baseload generation. Huge investments in natural gas to go to generation. But we still have customers and we still have supply chains, regardless of politics in your state or in Washington, that will want lower carbon alternatives. They will want to be able to say they're using renewable electricity. So how do we balance baseload and speed to market to meet all of these demands on our system while also being renewable or low carbon? Biogas and RNG is in a very sweet spot in the middle of that Venn diagram. Speed to market is excellent compared to a large natural gas generation facility. Baseload, 24/7, 95% capacity factor, and low carbon, right? We're really at a sweet spot. And generally, we can fit in small spaces. RNG facilities, if you guys are familiar, they're not taking up acres, hundreds of acres like a solar field, right? They're generally not up against as many NIMBY or not in my backyard barriers as a baseload natural gas facility. So we have some really great attributes to RNG to electricity systems that make this a great potential move for RNG. When you layer on policies out of Washington that are against things like wind and solar, and you start to see those market dynamics shift, things like RECs change, right? Pricing of RECs change, availability of capacity changes. And then you also see interest in things like 24/7 matching for load and your renewable claims as a customer, right? So if I'm Google, there is pressure on me. I can no longer go out and say, I bought all of my solar PPAs, right? I need to demonstrate that at 2 a.m. when my solar or when my servers are running, that the electricity I bought matched my need, matched my load. Solar can't do that, right? So biogas, again, has a niche there. So for those that might be dual utilities, right, you have this huge complementary market scenario where you have gas assets that can serve both as production facilities for RNG, but also can serve as capacity for the electric side of any utilities business. But if you're a gas only utility, right, you now see potentially a growth in customers that are on the generation side and needing to build out infrastructure to serve those generation customers. So there's a lot more support, I think, that we're seeing at the state level for electricity and the build out of the gas system that it might require to bring those megawatts onto the grid. So I will wrap all of this up very briefly and just say that we are very optimistic about where the market is headed. I think we have a lot of really promising policies at both the state and the federal level, but those policies look a lot different than they did 3 or 4 years ago. We are not building this industry off of California any longer. We are not relying on vehicle fuel necessarily to build this industry. We are getting creative in how we finance these projects, and the policies that can be leveraged to recover costs for these are diversifying, and they're diversifying fast. So want to encourage this group to think creatively about financing options. Where can you bring in revenue and get that revenue approved to help bring down the cost for your customers? Continuing to talk about asset agility for your regulators, I think is going to be really important. And then generally, I think making sure that we're not pigeonholing RNG's end use to just a burner tip, that there are a lot of other creative ways where RNG is being used. And I think that utilities can be players in that space. So hopefully that was all interesting and new information for you guys, but I'm going to stop and let you guys ask questions because I want to create that opportunity. And if I just totally missed the mark on what you guys were hoping to get out of this, we can go wherever you'd like to go in the time we have left.
Heather, that was great. Thank you so much for your time. And a reminder, everyone, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A function for those questions. Heather, since I'm the one with my camera on, I'm going to take the liberty of asking the first question.
Right.
I spent a few years in DC, so your conversation about hitting the hill and advocating for tax credits and other domestic policy around financial support was interesting to me. If you could wave a magic wand and have one piece of policy be enacted tomorrow, like what would be that game changer for the industry? What's that one magic policy bullet?
Oh, I have so many. I want just one. I'm going to cheat and I'm going to give you two.
Okay.
One is an investment tax credit for RNG, which we had for all of a minute in late 2024. That disappeared, it expired, and we weren't able to get that into reconciliation. So the investment credits for RNG specifically for projects that are putting into the pipeline doesn't exist anymore. So that is paramount priority. I think the other is on the electricity side. I think that there is a lack of policy that incentivizes baseload 24/7, essentially what they're calling clean firm, right? We want clean, but we want reliable firm power. There is not a policy, an incentive, a market payment. There's nothing out there that says biogas or natural gas generation is better than solar. So having a policy that incentivizes, creates a financial mechanism that rewards something like RNG based electricity or even natural gas based electricity, I think would be huge. It would be a market mover.
Great. Second question. and because you touched on another thing that I found significant. You mentioned some of your messaging is resonating a lot with some of the public utility commissions you're meeting with. Now, here in the Northeast, as you probably know far better than I do, the public utility commissions have taken a few different looks at renewable natural gas, some more positive, some a little less positive. Um, any recommendations or thoughts on strategies for getting regulators to sort of allow rate base investment opportunities, excuse me?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of threads you can pull in that conversation, right? Depending on your commission. So, reliability and energy costs have been, I think, the biggest piece lately that are getting more attention. We also see, especially in New England and in the Northeast, this panic, for lack of a better term, about not moving fast enough on sustainability goals. And so there is a softening in many commissions that were very pro electrification toward options like biogas and RNG that they were very close to in years past. So I think one is just that RNG is market ready in terms of meeting sustainability goals and helping them in the near term, especially. And then piggybacking on that sort of stranded asset bit, right? Because that was creating a lot of heartburn of like, but I don't really like gas. I don't really want to, commit 50 years to these assets that I don't really want to be around that long. And so we've essentially said, hey, we can help you today in the form of RNG. And then if you really get there and you want to electrify in 15 years, we'll just pivot, right? Like when it comes to repowering or whatever you want to call it, right? Let's throw a generator on it, call it a day. You're still an asset that's providing service and meeting both goals, both today and down the road. So that's sort of the landscape of the commission. I think when you're talking about like tactical, how to get rate-based investments approved, what we've seen nationwide is one, the barriers that I talked about, and just in terms of voluntary customers, they don't know how to communicate that premium to their shareholders. And that continues to be a barrier that we struggle to break down. So the other alternative is really just finding those customers who are buying because they want it and they don't really care about the global standards on carbon accounting, and leveraging those as partners with your commissions to go in and say like, hey, I'm a customer, I want X, and I need the utility to help me get there. Because absent a very specific customer demand that can be demonstrated, the recovery has been tough. The other piece of that is the affordability, which is show the commissions how you can mitigate costs. There have been examples throughout the country where commissions have approved non-utility customer mechanisms to recover costs, right? So, hey, we want to rate base some of this, but we also want to help mitigate costs by monetizing it in external markets. And so that is a play that has worked as well, especially as the demand hasn't quite met the supply or the interest in utilities. So allowing for things like, fertilizers to be sold and that revenue to come back into the customer base and attributes to be sold. We've seen utilities sell into LCFS markets in California and bring that attribute revenue back into the utility. So helping the commission understand how those costs can be mitigated and not assuming that if I go out and I buy something at 10x price premium, that the utility customer has to bear all of that. Do the work and the creative thought about maximizing other external revenue opportunities. And I think the commissions have been surprisingly supportive of those.
Fantastic. That's very helpful and insightful. And I do appreciate your sort of emphasis on the ultimate, not focusing just on the burner tip. I think that's an important point, especially for those of us who are so frequently so focused on the burner tip.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for your time. Not seeing any more questions. I think you just did a perfect job and you left no stone unturned. So we really appreciate your time here. If folks do have questions, as Heather mentioned at the onset, please feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to communicate those. Heather, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all who joined and took the time to be with us on this Wednesday. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the time, Christian. And I'm glad you guys were all able to join. And certainly, if you guys have follow up questions or you want to dig more into the biogas and RNG space, you know where to find me. Or if you don't, ask Don or Christian. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.